It was a battle compared to Agincourt and Trafalgar. During the summer of 1940, the Royal Air Force took on the Luftwaffe in a fierce contest over the skies of England. At stake was the defence of freedom and democracy against Nazi tyranny, and it was to be a defining moment in British history. In June 1940, after a blitzkrieg attack by German forces, France fell. Its troops had seized vast swathes of Europe and were now parading along the Champs-Élysées in Paris. Adolf Hitler briefly visited the capital before turning his ambitions northwards. Although the British Expeditionary Force had escaped from Dunkirk, it lost vital equipment during the campaign, including aircraft. Now, with its coastline visible from occupied France, England was on its own. The entire nation faced a fight for survival.
They looked unstoppable. The only thing that really was stopping them from, dominating Western Europe was the English Channel and Britain. And it wasn't just the Royal Air Force, it was the Royal Navy, the British Army, and everything that the nation had. So, pivotal moment, and it was really at that moment that everyone's world attention was focused on Britain.
Under the leadership of Air Chief Marshal Sir Hugh Dowding, the RAF's Fighter Command created a defensive shield using radar, local observers and control rooms to give early warning of air attacks. Protecting the front line over southeast England were the Fighters of 11 Group, a reactive air force led by Air Vice Marshal Keith Park. Britain was ready.
The Royal Air Force were in a very good place. From 1936 onwards, there was an integrated air defence system in Britain. It had been created by Dowding and Park, the two great air battle commanders. And it worked, it was really good, it was layered. You had radar, you had observers, you had systems of filtering. So information would go to one place where it would be disseminated and sent out, and from there it would spread out to the right people at the right place. So although we had fewer fighters than the Germans, and the Germans certainly outnumbered us as much as 10 to 1, we actually could get our scarce resource into the right place because of this integrated air defence system. Keith Park is an amazing character, a New Zealander who'd come to Britain to fight in the First World War, had become a fighter ace in his own right, flying Bristol fighters, two-seat fighter aircraft, that had, I suppose, given him the capability of understanding leadership and how you need to keep your fighters in the right place.
He was the great tactician. He and Dowding worked very hand in hand, and he realised that his aim was not to waste his resources. And so he had to make the decision virtually every day how he'd launch and how he'd fight his battles. But the great thing about the Dowding system is you didn't have standing patrols. So you have your aircraft on the ground, ready to go, and then attack a formation. Whereas in France, they had to sort of get up and patrol and wait for the aircraft to come. And that is very wasteful in operating aeroplanes.
The Dowding system was the most advanced and effective air defence system in the world. I don't think the Germans really understood just how vital and how important it was to the RAF. Without that, we couldn't possibly have managed to scramble our squadrons on time to meet the Germans. The Germans didn't realise that they were impaling themselves on the most advanced air defence system in the world.
The German High Command planned an invasion of Britain, codenamed Operation Sea Lion, and Hitler set its deadline for mid-September. To achieve success, the plan called for air superiority by the Luftwaffe to protect the German invasion fleet. But after its easy victories on the continent, the German Air Force and its commander, Reich Marshal Hermann Göring, were at first complacent.
Well, one of the problems the Luftwaffe has is it didn't have a strategy and it didn't really have a plan. It really was done on the back of a fact packet. I mean, they thought what they would do is they'd bring the Royal Air Force up into the air and knock them out. They thought that the Royal Air Force had about 200 Spitfires, 300 Hurricanes. It would take them no more than 14 days to be able to do this. And then the airspace would be clear. There would be no air supremacy. The Germans, in fact, would have their air supremacy over the Channel, and if Hitler wanted to invade, well, that was up to the Kriegsmarine and the Wehrmacht to actually invade. So the German plan was not thought through. It didn't have that simple thing that everybody knows, that your plan, even if it's just a simple one, is always going to have a problem when you have contact with the enemy. And that famous saying, the enemy has a vote, is absolutely right. The Royal Air Force had a major vote.
The Germans boasted a fleet of Dorniers, Heinkels and Stuka bombers, and protecting them was one of the best combat fighters in the world, the Messerschmitt Bf 109. But the RAF could call on two formidable aircraft in its hour of need.
There are two great protagonists in the Battle of Britain. It's the Spitfire and the Hurricane. And there were, let's say, about 18 squadrons of Spitfires, 39 squadrons of Hurricanes at the beginning of the Battle of Britain. So the Hurricane gets the lion's share. It couldn't climb as fast as the Spitfire, so it took on the bombers because they tended to be at 10 and 12,000 feet, whereas the Spitfire could get up in the same time at combat power to 13,000 feet where the fighters were, which is where you get this Spitfires go for the fighters and Hurricanes go for the bombers.
With the majority of fighter command composed of Hurricanes, they would account for more kills than the Spitfire. It was a robust aircraft that could inflict great damage.
The Hurricane is a really good gun platform. It's got 4 Brownings on each wing, and they are concentrators, so you get concentrated punch, which allows you to go through the German bombers' armour, because each of those aircraft was armoured.
And also battle damage repair, because most of it, the fuselage was fabric, the wings were a bit metal on it, so if it got shot up, a bit of dope and a bit of canvas and dope, and it was back in the air again.
Although the Spitfire was fewer in number, it captured the public's imagination. Pilots welcomed its armoury, and flying one would force out the best in them.
300 rounds per gun, or 14.7 seconds. So you could fire your guns in a single burst, and you had 14 seconds. Otherwise, you tended to fire 2-second burst or 3 seconds burst. It's just that firing was difficult business, particularly firing other than dead astern. Usually, the only time you succeeded in war was to get almost within touching distance of the enemy aircraft and then fire, close your eyes and fire. Not quite like that, but you had to get very close.
In the first few weeks, the Luftwaffe mounted small raids to test Britain's defences. But in July, Goering ordered the closure of the English Channel to British shipping and supplies.
So the first official stages of the Battle of Britain actually were over the Channel from the 10th of July. This was attacks on convoys, and in fact there's this famous convoy called Peewit that was very badly damaged. Almost every ship had been hit, and that meant that actually eventually you couldn't put convoys through the Channel. So what happened was that the Germans had won a small victory there.
The scramble call came, and I got airborne with 2 other Spitfires, and off we went over a convoy patrol to do a convoy patrol off the north coast of Lincolnshire. So when we finally caught up with this Junkers 88 at about 20,000 feet, I was some distance behind, but I saw them engage it and then pull away. And as I got nearer and nearer, I saw one engine was smoking, and I'd been told, get as close as you can before. And I was getting, and just as I was about to, the rear gunner came to life and lambasted my aeroplane. And he fell away and I fell away. And then by the time I sort of got things under control, the sky was empty. The engine had been hit, and there was a bullet had glanced off the windscreen and left a crack. And well, I turned west and realized I was losing power. Eventually, I had to put it in the sea. I got away with something which very, very few people have done.
The RAF's fighters were flown by young men, brave and eager, but often barely qualified. It could have tragic consequences.
It normally took 18 months to train a pilot. They had to shave that off, so it became 12 months, and eventually pilots were coming to the front line with only 8 hours experience on an aircraft like the Spitfire behind me. And the problem with that meant they hadn't really fired their guns at anger. They knew nothing about air combat. If they survived the first couple of sorties, they were going to survive longer.
I was only given quarter of an hour, 20 minutes to fly, and we were told how to land it and the manner in which we could do it, always looking over your nose to the left. And I landed on grass, no problem at all. It's kid stuff, absolutely.
When I arrived at Biggin Hill, I reported to the squadron commander with the other two sergeants. We stood there, and the squadron commander said to me, Pickering, he said, how many hours have you done on hurricanes? It was a hurricane station, Biggin Hill, at that time. I said, I've never even seen one, sir. He said, well, you'll see one this afternoon. You'll do 3 circuits and bumps on the aerodrome here at Biggin Hill. You will go to the sergeant's mess tonight. You will be awoken at 6 tomorrow morning, and you will join the Hurricanes with the squadron, and we shall fly down to Hawkinge on the coast near Dover, and you'll be in action tomorrow.
One chap, he had a little MG, and he was posted to our squadron, and he turned up at the on the airfield, and he was, well, he'd only just arrived, and the CO came out and said, well, you know, have you flown Hurricanes? Well, only, I think most of them had only done about, quite a lot of them who came to us had only done about, well, some hadn't flown Hurricanes at all. Anyway, this chap said he had, and the chap said, well, get your kit on then, because, you know, we're on standby, we can need you, we're shorter pilots. And so the chap got off. He was shot down, killed, and never even unpacked his car.
During the summer of 1940, Britain fought Nazi Germany alone as its young pilots engaged in fierce aerial battles over England. In early August, the Luftwaffe intensified its channel attacks on shipping and ports, as well as coastal airfields, but it had yet to secure air superiority, vital for the Germans' planned invasion. To achieve this, it decided to destroy Fighter Command in just 4 days. The Luftwaffe's aim was to obliterate RAF airfields before slowly bombing the rest of Britain into submission. Its start was codenamed Eagle Day, and it quickly led to the most difficult 24 hours for the RAF.
The build-up to the hardest day is really based on the German plan, der Adlertag, the Eagle Day, to wipe Fighter Command from the sky. And of course, it was very much the key that everybody put everything into this battle. This is the day when the Royal Air Force has no reserves available. It puts every aircraft forward. It moves the aircraft down from those in 12 Group protecting the Midlands in order to put as much capability into the air as it can.
We'd taken off and we'd gone into this head-on attack, and we're just getting within firing range. I don't know whether I'd fired my guns or not, but nevertheless I heard this terrific bang, and these gunners took away my sump, and these were the front gunners of the bombers. They took away my sump, smoke poured out, and I came down from 18,000 feet or so down to about 3,000 with this smoke pouring out of me. And when I got to 3,000, the aircraft just went up in flames. The engine just caught fire, and when flames came up, my cockpit cover was back. I had pulled that back, and I was all ready to get out if necessary. So I just raised myself in a flash, probably in a second, pulled the pin out of the cockpit like a cork out of a bottle.
The key is that we recovered most of our pilots and the Germans did not. The hardest day was a British victory, hard fought and hard won.
The RAF had resisted 850 German sorties and 69 enemy were destroyed. Again and again its pilots had scrambled to fend off Luftwaffe attacks. After visiting an RAF operations room, Prime Minister Winston Churchill declared, never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. But while the flyers had been fated as the few, behind them were the many.
These pilots were the tip of the spear of the defence of Britain. If you think of the Battle of Britain and our defence being a spear, that tip of that spear is Fighter Command, and then behind them is that long shaft of everything else and everybody else. It's a whole nation pulling together.
The Battle of Britain became a people's war. Observer Corps volunteers, women pilots for the Air Transport Auxiliary, anti-aircraft gunners, factory workers building more planes than were being lost, and barrage balloon handlers. Everyone helped defend the country. And on the ground, a dedicated crew ensured their pilots stayed flying.
All the few that I spoke to, spoke highly. They usually had a fitter and a rigger, one engine man and one a fuselage man, and then there was one between 5 of a radio man and all the rest. But they kept, and they refueled the aeroplanes, they turned them around, reloaded, and armourers and all the rest. So they were vital.
The ground crew were fundamental to the success of the aeroplane. They just felt they lent it to the pilot for the occasion, but it was their aeroplane. And they were very, very proud of it. So your fitters, your riggers, your armourers, they fussed over it. It was their baby. And if it was to be lost and their pilot was lost, they felt that loss really, really hard.
Around 3,000 foreign airmen from the Dominions and Nazi-overrun countries had made their way to Britain. Under the RAF's operational command, the new Polish Air Force was fully independent, and its 303 Hurricane Squadron would score the most kills in the Battle of Britain. Alexander Gabshevich had been fighting the Germans since the invasion of Poland.
When war broke out, they were sent up to protect as much as they could against the Luftwaffe, and they were totally outnumbered, and they had planes which were really quite sort of antique by comparison to what the Germans were flying. Anyhow, he managed to get involved in a dogfight with a Heinkel, I think it was, and he shot it down, and he was credited with another man of, first plane shot down during the war over Warsaw. I mean, they were much fiercer fighters, in fact, in the Battle of Britain than probably the English, because A, they had experience, and B, they had hatred, really. They really were, their country had been invaded by the Nazis, and they just wanted revenge and to do everything they could to free their country to get home.
During late August, German attacks continued. Communications were attacked and many British pilots were killed. Group Commander Keith Park was coming under intense pressure.
By the 1st of September, 11 Group particularly was beginning to feel the strain. The difficulties of the comms going down and all the rest was making it difficult for Park to actually control his fighters. They succeeded, but by the 1st of September it was all getting quite difficult. And the other problem was the shortage of experienced pilots. They'd lost 90 pilots by then. 65 had come in, but a new pilot was not going to last very long.
Germany's invasion of Britain, Operation Sea Lion, was set for mid-September. With time running out, the Luftwaffe made one final attempt to achieve air dominance. By switching its bombing to London, Goering hoped to draw out the few in one final showdown. Faulty intelligence suggested the RAF was down to its last fighter planes, but it had regrouped and was ready.
I suppose it's really the 15th of September you can say is the turning point, and Battle of Britain Day we call it now. This is the key. The Poles were in action, the Czechs, the Canadians, the New Zealanders, as well as Fighter Command, and we had enough aircraft. In fact, we had more aircraft than we had pilots, so we were on the front foot.
Huge numbers of British fighters from RAF Duxford and other airfields formed up to create a big wing to attack the Germans. The Luftwaffe was taken by surprise.
Now the crews had been briefed that there were no Hurricanes and and very few Spitfires. So as they crossed the coast, or the Maidstone line, suddenly they were attacked with... Park got all his squadrons up. All his squadrons. In fact, Churchill was watching it and said, "Where are your reserves?" He said, "I have none." But then they're heading for London again. And when they got to London, of course, really, Duxford Wing suddenly got it right.
In less than an hour, British pilots had shot down 56 German aircraft. The 15th of September was the most decisive day of the Battle of Britain. The Luftwaffe would never achieve air superiority, and Operation Sea Lion was postponed. Although air fighting continued and a German nighttime blitz lasted until May, the German Air Force could not endure such losses.
They were running out of bombs, they were running out of bullets, they were running out of aircraft engines, they were running out of aeroplanes, and they were running out of pilots. So Germany was attrited right the way down by the end of October 1940.
The Battle of Britain was won. The Royal Air Force had proved highly effective, its planes iconic, its pilots courageous. The few had helped save the country from disaster and set it on the path to victory and peace.
I think it's summed up by a comment by Geoffrey Wellham, and many of his colleagues said, "We don't want to be fated, we just want to be remembered." It was all an air war. It was the last battle held over British soil, and we won it.
And it was a tough war, a hard war, an unrelenting war, and it cost that number of lives. And it should be something we should think about, even in the future, the foundation of the peace, or a great contribution to the foundation of the peace, the main peace we've known all these years.
I always have felt, even from day one, that we did something special and that we would eventually be numbered alongside the archers at Agincourt and famous people over the ages and the people who fought in the Battle of Trafalgar and so on. We were rather special.